Hey, everybody. Before we start the show, I just want to let you know in the segment with RJ Scaringe and Marques Brownlee, you may hear me talk about some things that weren't in the clips that I'm going to share with you. And the reason for that is I didn't want to take too much of Marques's interview, and I'd really like you to go and listen to it because I think it has a lot of relevance to what we talk about here. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt. My name is Bodie, and I am your host. And in this episode, it's an all Rivian episode. We are going to hear from RJ Scaringe, Rivian's CEO, and Rivian's CFO, Claire McDonough. RJ did an interview with Marques Brownlee, and Claire McDonough talked at a Bank of America event. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It was some hoity-toity financial event. But anyway, we got some good information from both of these sources. Now, I don't mind stealing as much as I possibly can from Bank of America. I do have a problem taking a lot of content from Marques Brownlee. So I only took what I thought would pique your interest and give you some information, but would also lead you to his website. And I'll put a link in the show notes, or his YouTube channel, because even though he has a way bigger following than me, I don't want to ride his coattails too hard. All right, we're going to start with RJ Scaringe and Marques Brownlee. I don't know if I've said this, but RJ looks a lot like Steve O of Jackass. I mean, he doesn't talk like him, but he looks a lot like him. Like they could be brothers. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to hear about Rivian. In our first clip, we're going to hear about software. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
And one of the challenges in automotive historically is you like the teams and a lot of the technologies either siloed or very often outsourced. So electronics, software, infotainment, these are not typically things that car manufacturers do themselves. Mm-hmm. So for us, vertically integrating our electronic stack, so it's all the computers in the car, the software stack that sits on top of them, allowed us to integrate features in a way that you typically don't see.
Honestly, I think this is one of the differentiating features of this EV, which is this software is really good. And I think that's also kind of curious because a lot of traditional car companies I've described them as hardware companies first, really good at manufacturing, and then they happen to also have to do software to make it all work. Where some of the really good ones, Rivian, Tesla, Lucid, you might throw in there, really good software companies that are also making a car that works well around it. Do you think of that as an advantage for Rivian? Just specifically?
I mean, it's a huge focus for us. And when we talk about software, there's the things we see, that manifest in the UI here, but everything that exist under the surface. So the way the chassis controls work, powertrain controls, battery management, all of that being developed in-house allows us to quickly iterate and improve the product and add new features, add more range. This year's product is more range than last year's product, but it's largely through software updates. Which is really fun. But you have to control the entirety of the software stack to really fully leverage all the capabilities.
A few things I want to mention here or highlight. A lot of thought went into the R1 line. One of the things that he talked about was mixed disciplines all working together in the same room. Tesla talked a lot about this in that they don't have, Tesla and Rivian, they don't have siloed teams that are working without communicating or how should I say this? Communication isn't the best when you have teams working in different rooms. So you might have engineers from different disciplines all sitting in the same room so that they can recognize or solve issues early on versus later in the process, which is, adds more complexity and price to the vehicle. They talked a lot about the software, and you can't obviously see it on this podcast, but as they're talking about the software, they're bouncing through the infotainment screens. The software is buttery smooth. It looks really cool. They did a great job with that. Let's see here. I cut this out, but Rivian actually initially planned on building a sports car. So that's interesting. And then they pivoted towards the adventure vehicles. So that's pretty cool. And no Apple CarPlay or Google Play, whatever the Google's thing is, Android Auto. There you go. That's not going to be a thing in a Rivian because RJ said that they want to control the experience. I think they could do both, but I get it. Like if we talked a few weeks ago about Chevy or GM stopping Apple CarPlay, and I think that's a mistake. Only because I think it's going to be a bad user experience by stopping that. If there's a company like Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and they're staying up to date on their software and they're not letting that flag, like that's a priority for those companies, then I don't mind that there's not Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But if you're a company like GM, Ford, Dodge, Ram, Stellantis, all those companies, if you're a company that has proven in the past that you're not interested in keeping your stuff up to date, or you want to nickel and dime everybody, Mercedes, because you have that ability to charge for heating seats, then I'm not down with that. But mostly, I want to have the software updated on a regular basis, and I think a lot of you probably want that same thing. He talked a little bit about magic moments, and I think Rivian and Tesla deliver on this in spades. They constantly have features that just delight you. It may just be because they work really well, or there's just some feature that you never would have thought would be in a car, and it just shows up. So that's a nice bonus for those customers. Next up, we're going to get a Rivian and Amazon update.
To do that on any vehicle is hard. To do that in a vehicle when you've got this supply chain crisis happening in the backdrop, it's really hard. And to do that when you've got the challenges of operating with COVID, it was incredibly hard. And to just sort of stack those 4 different vehicles over the course of the last year was tested our operational capabilities, and it showed all the gaps that we had, and we learned so much in the last year. But as it stands today, the T and the S, the R1 platform is ramping. And the van program, while it's a completely different vehicle top hat, we do share some of the electronics, share some of the propulsion elements of the propulsion platform. But it's a much easier vehicle to build. Mm-hmm. It's there's like one seat and a jump seat. And it's like a big box with shelves in the back. So it's a different kind of vehicle than this. When you look at this, there's a lot of content. It's a complex vehicle to build.
Definitely.
So the Amazon vans and the commercial vans, we're ramping those. As you say, you're going to start seeing a lot of them on the roads. Yeah, it's
kind of, I feel like that's the most common Rivian vehicle I see on the road right now. Maybe it's just because of being in New Jersey, being around the Amazon facility.
There's more R1s on the road.
There are a lot around here.
The key is we deploy those in clusters.
I see. So there's probably a big cluster here. And then they also have to have their own like charging setup, and they get like walked through the advantages of the vehicle and like what to do, what not to do.
For a driver, I mean, imagine you're in a van all day long driving. This is your office.
Yep.
So the comfort, the drivability, things like regen, these all become really key elements of your what it feels like to be at work during the day.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of time on driver comfort and with drivers in the feedback loop through the development process. And one of the things we found was most important was actually getting in and out of the vehicle. So you have to get in and out of the vehicle
a lot,
about 300 times a day.
Jeez. Okay.
So the van is asymmetric. So on the driver's side, there's a forward hinge door,
right?
Which actually on a route you don't use that often. Yeah. And on what we would call the passenger side, there's a pocket door, so a door that sort of slides into the body itself. And so the ease at which you can hop out of the driver's seat, grab a package, and then get out of the vehicle through this open pocket door makes just that whole process a lot easier. And so that, coupled with, of course, the drivability of an EV, and then a really heavy focus on thermal control. So the seats are cooled and heated.
Nice.
And when I say cooled, not just vented, but actually, cooled refrigerated air blowing up through the seat, which on a hot day feels really nice to sit down on a seat. And it's almost like when you go into the kitchen, you open the refrigerator to cool off and it blows a burst of cool air. It's like your seat does that to you. So it's really something that the drivers have responded to positively, and it's the sought after vehicle within the distribution centers.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
The biggest takeaway that I had of this topic was the thermal seats. I want a thermal seat. We mentioned that Ford did a study versus heated surfaces versus HVAC systems in your vehicle. and which one was better and more efficient for an EV. And it turns out the heated surfaces are, because those heated surfaces are always warm, right? You open up your door, you get out, all of the air from the HVAC system is all that warm air or cold air, depending on what you got, is just goes out the door with you, right? But on the heated surfaces or the cooled surfaces in this case, that stays more local and it's actually more energy efficient. Ford did that study, and it sounds like Rivian has done the same thing. I really want a thermal seat. As somebody who lives in Arizona, those cool seats, I need that really bad. I would encourage you to go listen to the entire interview. It's really good. Marques has a couple of different YouTube channels. This is Waveform. All right, let's jump into our next section of the program, which is a Bank of America event. And they sat down with Rivian CFO, Claire McDonough. Analyst John Murphy asks the question. It has to do with supply chain. It has to do with production. We're just going to let Claire run with it. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
So really first to kind of kick off, the start of production, or the ramp of production, I should say, is sort of top of everybody's mind in understanding what's happening here. There's been some sort of downgrades of expectations. A lot of that has to do with what's going on the supply chain side, right? You can only make what you get, right? Or you can only put together what you actually get from the supply chain. So maybe you can just talk to us about how that is progressing, how you're thinking about this year. The 50,000 units this year has been rumored to be too low, and there might be some upside over time. Maybe talk about sort of what your actual capacity could be if suddenly everything that you were dealing with on the supply chain side actually got worked out and you had a flood of parts and actually started running full throttle on production.
Sounds great. Well, first, maybe I'll start with Q1 production levels that we've seen at our plant in Normal, Illinois. And throughout the course of Q1, we continued the build out and production of our R1 product line, which houses our R1T, our truck, and our SUV, the R1S. And we saw meaningful growth in the production quarter over quarter as we think about really the rate of growth that we've experienced throughout the course of Q1. As we also experienced in Q1, we took some downtime with our EDV, or our electric delivery van line as well. And we took that downtime to integrate two new key technologies into the vehicle. The first is our LFP battery pack, and the second is our in-house Enduro drive unit. And while production levels were low and expected to be low in that Q1 timeframe, I would say that the great bright spot is the fact that our Enduro drive unit launched on time and is ramping according to schedule and plan. And back to the second part of your question, as you think about what unlocks incremental volume for Rivian throughout the course of 2023, one of the biggest unlocks for us is related to the supply chain. So in our Q4 earnings call, we spoke at length about power semiconductors being that gating factor from an overall supply perspective. And one of the key mitigation tools that we have at our disposal is the introduction and the ramp of the Enduro drive unit this year, which unlocks a new secondary supply base of our power semiconductors within the plant. And then also, as we think about the fact that we're building today quad motors on the R1 line, and now we'll be introducing dual motor configurations, right? We need half of the power semiconductors per vehicle as you think about the introduction of the dual motors into the R1 line as well. And so as we talked about the 50,000 units of guidance that we provided for 2023, the gating factor that we talked about was supply. And so our ability to continue to, ramp and execute against the growth of that Enduro drive unit, which today is feeding the EDV line, in the second half of this year, we'll move to more of a surplus position whereby we're building excess Enduro drive units that can also, fulfill our R1 volumes as well. That's really where the upside opportunity relies from an overall, ramp and production perspective.
So it sounds like production is improving for Rivian, and we've had many reports saying such. They did a shutdown for the delivery van, the Amazon van, so that they could install or transfer over to LFP batteries, which aren't as energy dense, but they're more affordable and they can take more of a beating than the nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries can. And then they installed the Enduro Drive. The Enduro Drive was designed in-house. It combines like the drive unit, the inverter, and some other things all together. It delivers more than 600 horsepower. Not only does it deliver more power, it's more affordable for Rivian to use because it's all designed in-house. And it's more efficient, which, as you can imagine, is pretty important. And then she talked a little bit about having power semiconductor supply chain issues, but it sounds like moving to the Enduro is going to help ease that pain a little bit. Next up, we're going to hear about Rivian's factory in Georgia and the potential capacity for the R12 line. Like, how many can they build there?
When we think about the next leg of capacity that comes on in Georgia, I think it's 2026. What is the install capacity in the first leg, or even in total? And are we looking at that being completely R2s? I think in the past there was a little bit of RT that was going to come into the Georgia plant, but I think that's been pushed out, and we're looking at R2s at the moment. So what's the potential capacity there?
Just the total capacity will be 400,000 units in Georgia. I will build it out in a modular fashion, so with 200,000 units coming online first in the 2026 timeframe. And R2 is a platform, the same way that the R1 vehicle is a platform with an R1T and an R1S. So there, you could think about there certainly being different variants over time that will sit on that R2 platform as well.
Got it. So the second 200,000 tranche, is there? Have you guys given us a time frame on that, or the first of 2026? The second we haven't gotten it.
We haven't given specifics on when that second 200,000 units come online.
Based on what Rivian is dealing with at the moment in terms of the R1T and the R1S and having these supply chain issues, the production issues, do you think it's reasonable that they could build 200,000 units in 2026? It seems like a lot to me, but I'm curious to know what you think. I mean, it's a whole new platform with a whole new form factor sitting on that platform, whether that's a sedan or a small SUV. I don't think there'll be a truck, although I've heard some people say that there'll be a smaller truck. You can't get much smaller than the Rivian. It's a pretty small truck in terms of trucks. So, yeah, that seems like 200,000 is a lot in 2026. Maybe 2027, 2028, maybe something like that. But 2026 seems aspirational more than realistic. Our next question is not something that we really cover a lot here, simply because I believe, if I'm understanding the question correctly, he's asking, can you charge more money for the R1T? And on my show, I'm always asking, can't we charge less money? So these are financial people. They want to make more money, so that makes sense. So let's go ahead and listen to that question and the answer.
Okay. And if we think about the R1 and the R2, one of the very pleasant surprises I think you found, as costs have inflated to some degree, is that you had some obvious upward price adjustments. It's not something we usually hear in the auto industry, although actually we're hearing more of it these days than we have it in the past. What is your opportunity to potentially take more price on the R1? I mean, is it as orders are, functionally, like as you slip these in, you obviously don't want to raise price on people in the backlog, but I mean, what is your opportunity to take price over time in response to just market dynamics, or potentially higher input costs?
We see that the bigger opportunity is being there to really stretch and extend the top end of the portfolio, whether that's the addition of new technologies in the vehicle. So how we think about taking what's already a phenomenal product today and making that even better, right? Quicker, longer ranges over the long term, or incremental, trim packages as well that help us, extend up ASP as well. And we've talked a bit about in the past the fact that within our pre-order base of configured orders, we've seen strong orientation towards our more premium offerings as well. So that gives us confidence to continue to invest in the product development roadmap for the R1, product in particular. And the opportunities that we have is to leverage many of those technologies as we think about the cross-platform investments that will become the foundation for R2 as well. So we're getting a strong return on those investments as well.
Got it. Okay. And then when you think about the R2, it's going to come in at a sort of a more semi-mass market price point, but we're only talking about 200,000 units of capacity. So theoretically, that could be a somewhat of a premium product. You're talking about the R2 is opening up the market for you, so I understand that like over time, it might go down in price point. But when it's first launched, there's going to be tremendous demand for the product. If it's anything like the R1, even just a slightly scaled down version. How are you thinking about pricing on that to kick off, or where you maybe not even if you give us a dollar value, that'd be great, but how you would position that, how you're going to position that in the market?
Sure. So one of the important pieces is really looking at the portfolio overlaps and pricing. And so as you think about the R1, base price today of an R1T starts at $73,000. We think about, right, how does the most premium, R2 stretch up towards, that level, but ensuring that we're leaving the R1 platform as our true flagship platform in the market that will maintain, strong overall ASPs for us. And so that's largely, how we think about it. I would say one of the important pieces that we've continued to look out and evaluate, especially given some of the broader changes in price over the course of the last year or so within the EV space, is to always ensure that we were building the unit economic model of R2 with a more normalized pricing environment in mind for us. And so while, you could have looked back at the market at sort of that average, ASP, in the high 60s and, even, beyond for some comparable vehicles, we were making sure that we were building a model and infrastructure and, cost structure that could accommodate, much lower price points as well as we think about the broader spans of that.
I understand why he's asking these questions because, again, he's a financial person, but man, would I like to hear how are we going to make these products more affordable? Not, hey, it seems like you have a popular product. How are we going to jack up the prices and make as much money as we can while we can? Which I get it. It's their job, or I don't like it. All right. I skipped over some questions because they were more pricing questions. This next one has to do with supply chain and semiconductor issues, like not being able to get them.
Okay. And when you think about the back to the supply side of things really quickly, the semiconductor issue, you're solving that someone with Enduro, you're solving that with with going to sort of dual motor as opposed to quad motor. You're finding these ways internally to deal with this and second supply and maybe using less semis or using less, motor, to deal with it. How much externally has the issue been solved with some of your suppliers? Are you finding it still a real challenge and you're just like, okay, we have to find a second source. We have to find a way to work around this because we're just not getting the answers or the supply that we need from our existing partners?
I would say we've seen constraints within the broader, silicon carbide supply chain as a whole. And so one of the advantages that we've had from an engineering capability and development vantage point is the fact that we, design our inverter in-house. That inverter can utilize both silicon carbide. It can also use, silicon IGBTs as well. And so because of that, it provides more flexibility. And then through the drive unit efficiency that our team has been able to gain as well, we've been able to, in certain cases, expand the range of our vehicles while transitioning from silicon carbide to silicon. And so I think it comes back to the advantages of the level of vertical integration that we have as a business. And so the nimbleness in which we can respond and adapt and innovate around supply constraints that exist.
I've mentioned this before, but I love hearing about how they solve problems when it comes to manufacturing in terms of, working around supply chain issues, or if they run up against a problem with manufacturing, how they solve that. I love hearing that stuff. And for them to have an inverter that could take advantage of silicon carbide or silicon IGBTs, which I'll be honest, I don't know what that is, and I'm not going to look it up because I'm on a timeline. Just the fact that they could switch back and forth, I think that is fantastic. That is so interesting to me. Our next question has to do with gross margins and pricing again, but she does talk a little bit about how initially when Rivian was just starting up, they negotiated prices and they didn't get the best prices because when you're a startup, these companies aren't going to give you their best prices. You're lucky to even have them as suppliers. Now that Rivian is growing, they can renegotiate with their suppliers a little bit and get the better prices. So let's go ahead and listen to that.
One of the big things is getting the gross margin break even, right? I think you're talking about that in getting actually into positive territory into 2024. Is that purely a question of scale and hitting a certain level of production that's significantly above 50,000 units? How do you kind of envision getting there?
Sure. As we think about the gross profit bridge from Q4 2022 to Q4 of 2024, as you mentioned, we expect to see a true step change, not just to break even, but to positive territory in that time frame. And about 2/3 of that overall bridge is driven by fixed cost leverage that's derived from having greater levels of volume running through our plant in Normal, Illinois. The other final third of that walk is split 50% based off of how we're effectively reducing our material costs. And so the material cost reductions are driven by design related changes. So whether that's the introduction of our in-house drive units, whether that's introduction of LFP battery packs into the mix, whether it's our next generation network architecture, our next generation battery packs. There's a lot of core technologies that will be introduced over the course of 23 and 24 that materially reduce our material costs. And then the other component of the material cost reduction is driven by commercial negotiations and commercial cost downs as well. And many of our supplier agreements were set back in 2018, 2019, before we were a pre-production business and company. So there's an embedded risk that's baked into many of those contracts. So now we have the opportunity as we're bidding out some of these new technologies with the supply base, as we think about the carrot of R2 as well in the longer term, that allows us to reset pricing with many of those supply partners as well. And then the final piece is AFP. And that AFP is driven both by the shift from our early pre-order customers, so those pre-March 1st pre-order business, which will largely be exhausted throughout the course of 2023. And then the other elements are really this mix shift as we think about the next generation of technologies going into the vehicles themselves. So the ability to gain pricing power with new performance, new capabilities, new trim levels that allow us to meaningfully increase ASP as well over that time frame.
It sounds like next year Rivian will be break even in terms of their financials, or maybe even a little ahead. I think I read an article, I don't have it in front of me here, that said that Rivian should be profitable in 2024. But in either case, the way that they're going to do that, according to Claire McDonough, is they're going to have to reduce costs, and they're going to have to change the way that they design things to reduce manufacturing, which a good example of that is the Enduro motor. And then they need to improve manufacturing around those design changes. And we talked about renegotiating with suppliers, and then they have to wait for that ASP, which is, they say this a lot, it's average sales price. They have to wait for that to catch up with current pricing, because there are still reservation holders who reserved and locked in a price, that was, a year or 2 years ago. So they need those people to take delivery of their vehicles so that Rivian has that opportunity to sell more vehicles at that higher cost. Anyway, that's what I got out of it. If you got something different out of it, email me, Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. Our next question is, how is Rivian retaining reservation holders? Because there's a long wait time to get a truck. What is Rivian doing to keep people on that reservation list and not floating off to, some other car company?
When you think about just on the wait time, because that is, it's very important. I understand why you're doing that. How are you holding on to folks as they continue to wait? 3,000 units this year. You're saying your backlog. I'm implying it, but you're saying you're going to sell through your backlog at least through 2023. So it might be larger than that. We'll see. Not trying to look for exact number, but how do you hold on to those folks and really continue to market to them and have them not slip out into buying, a competitive product?
Sure. So to clarify, the pre-order backlog through 23 is the pre-March 1st backlog from last year. So,
right, so
the backlog extends well into 24. But it's a key consideration for us. So one of the key initiatives that we've had has been around our test drive program. So getting and making sure that every one of our pre-order customers has the opportunity to experience the Rivian, drive a Rivian as well. One of the other core benefits that we have is the fact that before the IRA bill was put into place, we allowed our customers to transition from their current pre-order of $1,000 that was fully refundable to commit $100 of that purchase. It would be a committed purchase. And so many of the pre-order customers before that August timeframe are also able to be grandfathered into the $7,500 tax credit as well. And so that's another, I would say, sticking point as we think about the value that is embedded within our pre-order base as well.
Honestly, I think they've held on to people for so long because there's not really a great alternative out there for folks unless you're looking at the F-150 Lightning, which is a really good alternative, but it's a different market than what Rivian's trying to serve. I don't think people care about the test drives, honestly. Like if you really want a truck, you can go out and buy an F-150 Lightning from a dealer for around the same price as the Rivian. But if you really want what Rivian has to offer, you're going to wait for that truck. So I don't think that's that big of a deal. But I do think that it's commendable that Rivian has people waiting for as long as they have for basically a first shot truck. Like this is their first time building a truck, and it's gotten such good reviews and such good word of mouth that people really want that truck. I think that's great for Rivian. All right, next up, the next question is kind of long and convoluted, or at least I thought it was. The thing that I want to get out of this and that I want you to get out of it is what discussions are like, or if they even exist, with FedEx and UPS with the delivery van that Rivian's offering.
Yeah, right. You can see that on YouTube and really appreciate what it is. It's pretty awesome stuff. And it's kind of simple, but kind of amazing, right? Like as a consumer, you must love, people must love that.
Right.
There's been some news reports, I think in the Wall Street Journal and other places that the exclusivity with Amazon might be something you're kind of negotiating out of. Can you just remind us, what the exclusivity is? As my understanding, it was really for last mile delivery, full stop specifically. So negotiating out of that might not be that necessary for you to really grow with other customers. But I would imagine if you're negotiating out of that, or changing that, right now negotiating out of it, just curious what the discussions are. I gotta imagine somebody like FedEx or UPS is waiting in the wings, because last mile delivery, really, they're kind of the other two, folks out there that are behemoths. I don't know if you can comment on, if there's other customers waiting in the wings, but, what's going on with the exclusivity, how it's structured, and are there talks going on?
Sure. So, first off, we'll start with the Amazon, relationship itself, which, remains incredibly strong. As you probably have seen, there's been, an Amazon blog post that they put out recently talking about the, over 3,000 vehicles that are in the field and the 75 million packages that they've, been able to deploy, with those vehicles as well. And so I would say, as we sit here today, there's a lot of excitement around, the carbon impacts that this deployment has had across the board, as we think about, Amazon's climate pledge in particular. And as we think about, right, with IRA and the commercial benefits, the long tail of commercial customers that are also equally excited about the broader, commercial EV opportunities as well. One of the advantages of the Amazon, program that we have is the opportunity to work through what's been, the largest deployment of, electric vehicles into a fleet over that time frame as well in a commercial capacity. And so that the core learnings that we've gone through with them, not just from the vehicle, but how are we deploying the vehicles? How are we utilizing our telematics-based, software solutions to help improve, uptime in the vehicles and reduce total cost of ownership for Amazon are critically important as we think about the long-term commercial opportunity set that sits out there as well for ourselves. And the exclusivity agreement with Last Mile is through 2026, so it is a time-based, agreement that we have with them. We do have the opportunity to think about the broader long tail of commercial customers beyond that Last Mile cohort as well. And there's certainly lots of, cargo or other types of use cases that could be utilized with, the sort of vehicles that we have in our disposal. And then as we think about the opportunity to really expand the customer base as well, the Amazon agreement is, a cost plus based agreement. So the incremental volume opportunity, is also a benefit to Amazon over the longer term as we, leverage all of the fixed costs and labor of running that line.
Got it. So it sounds like there's no change to what's going on right now.
No change.
I know that wasn't the most exciting answer, but I thought it was really interesting. All right. Our final question is going to be about IRA credits. So let's just go ahead and dive into it.
Got it. Okay. You mentioned the IRA, commercial vehicle side, largely understandable. But on the R1 and the R2 side, it could be pretty impactful. I know there's kind of potentially this gap here. I mean, how does the R1 line up right now with the new rules that or sort of interpretation of the rules or the law that we just got last week? And how are you setting up the R2 to be theoretically fully compliant, so you're getting the full 7,500 and maybe even dipping into the $35 per kilowatt hour in some way as well?
So for R1, because of the price point of the vehicles themselves,
tough.
It's hard for it to qualify. There's leasing opportunities that are available for R1 that become attractive, or also, commercial use cases. So if you were a general contractor and you're purchasing an R1T, for your vehicle, you can take advantage of some of those, commercial credits as well. So that's really the opportunity set as we think about R1s. And then it's more so to focus on how we're building out the supply chain for battery cells for R2, so that we'll have battery compliant vehicles, given at that price point, it becomes a much more meaningful incentive as you think about, the opportunity set available to R2 as well. But beyond the credits that we'll receive as well, we do get, right, because we're building our battery modules and battery packs in-house. So we do have the, $10 per kilowatt hour credits that hit this year, which is a benefit for us. And then one of the other advantages we have with IRAs associated with all of the incentives for the charging networks that we're building out as well. We build our DC fast chargers in-house at our plant in Normal, Illinois. And so one of the points of the bills that have been put in place around charging infrastructure is that needs to be, made in America. And there are actually very few players that have manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. right now that can tap into, the billions of dollars of available funding there.
And can you remind us how that would work for the chargers?
So there's multiple different incentive packages available for charging based infrastructure. And so it can be upwards of 80% of the cost to put that charger in place through government credit.
So it sounds like Rivian's still going to be able to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act credits. I thought I read an article, and we may talk about it here in a second after I look through all of my articles, but I thought I read an article that they actually did end up qualifying for the tax credit, but I'll have to double check on that. So we're actually going to talk about some Rivian news at the very end of this episode. Unfortunately, I haven't read any of the articles yet. That's why I think I saw something about this, but I wasn't sure. But it sounds like all of the IRA credits that Rivian qualifies for benefits Rivian and not so much customers, unless you own and operate a fleet or you're a contractor or something like that. All right, that is it for me this episode. If you want to learn more about what it takes to run an EV startup, go listen to the rest of Marques Brownlee's interview. It is so good. If you listen to it and you have things you want to discuss, email me, Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. And yeah, that's it for me, everybody. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you on Friday.